On this episode, we sit down with Bangkok Podcast co-creator and Season 1 co-host Tony Joh.
So, if you want to hear Tony's stories about travel, being an expat, and possibly moving back to Asia, you'll dig this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 on a 4-month holiday, but decided to stay and become a famous singer. It hasn't happened yet, but until it does, I will settle for being a famous podcaster.
And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a 1-year teaching contract 19 years ago, fell in love with the baht getting stronger and stronger against the dollar, and I'm staying. We want to say a quick thank you to one of our patrons, Alvaro Brandon, who supports us at the show shoutout level. Stick around after our interview with Bangkok Podcast co-creator and Season 1 co-host Tony Joh to hear why Alvaro is either an anagram maniac or an 80-year-old man who feeds stray cats.
Not sure which one.
Yeah. Before we start, a huge thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a whole bunch of cool stuff, including our regular show a day early, behind-the-scenes photos and videos of our interviews, discounts on swag, which you can find on our website, and various other things that aren't available to regular listeners. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and random topics. We just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about the strong baht, the lack of tourists in Samui, and Thailand's ongoing ganja saga. To become a patron, head to bangkokpodcast.com/support.
Yeah. All right. Well, on this episode, we are really lucky to be joined by Tony Joh. Now, for those that don't know, Tony is the co-creator of this very podcast, having launched it with me on 31st of May, 2010. Now, Tony and I did the show together for the 77 episodes of Season 1 before he moved on to greener pastures to work in Japan. And now, nearly 10 years later, Tony is living back in Canada, but for how long? On a recent trip through Asia, we were lucky to have Tony join our most recent podcast meetup, and he came by my condo to sit down and chat about being a reverse expat, what he's learned about living overseas during his travels, and why he's considering a move back to Asia. So here is my conversation with my old friend, Tony Joh. All right, well, we are super psyched to have sort of a guest, a patron of the show, the originator, one of the originators of the podcast, along with me. This is Season 1 co-host and co-founder of the Bangkok Podcast, Tony Joh. Welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks, Greg. Good to be back.
It's good to see you. Now, really, really quick, I want to get into an update of what you've been doing since we last talked. But for those who don't know, the podcast started actually back in 2010 when you and I sort of banged together a little podcast setup and didn't know what the hell we were doing.
Yeah.
And we did it for a couple of years, and it was great fun. And then you took off to Japan, and I got married, and we sort of went our separate ways. And then a couple years later, actually about 4 years later, the podcast was resurrected with Evo, and we've been going strong ever since. But you and me started it, and you took off to Japan, and you've been having great worldly adventures ever since. So can you fill us in on what's been going on for the past, 9 years?
Actually, it's been great to see that the podcast is still online. It's kind of fun to see that the little show that we started, like literally we had no idea in the beginning, like what button do we push to turn this on?
I know, it was crazy.
It's good to see that it's still doing so well, which is nice.
I tell people we literally had women's nylon stretched over cross point frames.
And actually, I got those from a store just down the street from where I live. Like I remember we were looking for pop filters.
Yeah.
And I looked online, and this is back in 2010, so I don't even think Amazon was available or anything like that. And I remember walking past this shop near where I lived, and they had those blue things that we used to stretch the women's nylon across. And I don't even know what they were for. I think they're from knitting or stitching.
Cross point?
Yeah, whatever that's called.
Cross stitch.
Yeah, so it was those. And just like completely random, I just happened to look in the store and saw them. So I like ran in. I'm like, yeah, I'll take those. And they worked out well. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah, I recently told a story on I think one of the bonus shows about one of the biggest all-time tech fails was when we interviewed Christy Kenny, the ambassador, and we showed up and had everyone waiting for us, and we couldn't record because the software was borked or something.
No, that's because I didn't have the recording software on my computer. Because I'd reformatted my drive like the night before, and I forgot to download like the recording software. So, that was kind of funny.
We recovered well though.
But she was actually pretty cool. We did a second one later on, which actually worked out really well.
Yeah, she was very gracious.
Yeah, she was great. So, basically, so I left. I can't even remember when I left. I think it was 2011, and I moved to Japan. And when I moved to Japan, I started the Tokyo Podcast.
Yeah.
I'm really creative with my names of my podcast. You can see that trend, right? Bangkok Podcast, Tokyo Podcast.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. I don't know where I'll move to next, but I guarantee you I'll probably start that city's podcast. So I started the Tokyo Podcast, and it did quite well. It did really well. I think one of the reasons why is because of the history and past experience I had with the Bangkok Podcast kind of allowed me to avoid all those mistakes in the beginning and just kind of launch right away.
Yeah.
Although I will say something though, it's kind of interesting. You know, I don't know if you've experienced this or not, or in growing the show, but like when I first started to do the Tokyo Podcast, I didn't have a co-host. So it was actually really strange to like talk to myself, so to speak.
Right. You have to be like Smeagol, like the good Smeagol and the evil Smeagol talking to himself. Have
you done that? Because you've had a co-host on the show like ever since, right?
Yeah. I don't want to do it.
You haven't hosted a show by yourself, right?
No, I'd feel weird.
It does feel weird. Yeah.
It's just like, hey, everyone, listen to me rant by myself.
Yeah. So that was a bit strange at the beginning. I was like, hey, everyone, welcome to Tokyo Podcast. And over to Greg. Oh, Greg's not here. So back to me. It's kind of strange, but I managed to grow an audience with that. I did quite well. And from there, I was contacted by a local job board company called Expat. And they were looking for a social media person to help grow their social media platform.
Cool.
So they saw what I'd done with my podcast. They contacted me and said, hey, would you be interested in working for us? And I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. And that's kind of how that worked out. So I started working for them. And then I eventually got kind of busy. So I shut the podcast down and started working for them pretty much full time, doing digital marketing work for them, helping them grow. Yeah. Right. So I did that for almost the entire time that I was in Japan. I was there for, I think, 7 years in total. I probably worked for them for about 5 years. In the last couple of years, I was doing more freelance work. But then a couple things happened that started to kind of make me think about leaving Japan. One of which is that when I was working in Japan, I really actually enjoyed the work that I was doing.
Okay. For Gaijin Pod.
For Gaijin Pod, yeah. I was freelance. I was not freelance, but I was able to work kind of remotely from home sometimes in the office. I was creating these ad campaigns for big Japanese companies, and I really enjoyed this stuff a lot. So I was kind of, most of my time was taken up with work. But for me, being previously a small business owner, it wasn't unusual, to have most of your time taken up by work. Yeah. Right. So it was, and it's work I enjoyed. So I didn't really have, feel overwhelmed or anything like that. Probably wasn't best for Jing.
For your girlfriend.
For my girlfriend at the time. So Jing is a girl that I met here in Thailand. We both moved to Japan together. And I'd say one of the mistakes that I kind of made in that relationship was Jing was working in a Japanese company. Right. And I was working freelance at home, right? So I didn't quite appreciate or realize how challenging it was for her to work in these Japanese companies. Okay. And Jing is not one to really kind of talk about stuff. So I was just like, hey, I'm having fun. I hope she's having fun too. But I didn't realize she was having quite a difficult time working in these Japanese companies. And then eventually Jing got a job offer in Singapore, and it was a fantastic job offer. A huge bank offered her, lots of money to move to Singapore. And she's like, yeah, I'm going to take that. And I said, yeah, it sounds like a good deal for you. You should take that. So she moved to Singapore. So right around the time she moved to Singapore, the company I was working for, Gaijin got bought out by a big Japanese company. Okay. Fuji Media. They bought them out. Wow. And so they bought them out, and then they decided to change some things. And one of which was they didn't allow anybody to work from home.
Boo.
So Japanese companies, you have to understand, Japanese companies, they are very kind of top-down management style and very kind of old kind of traditional kind of mentality. Meaning like basically Japan is kind of a very engineering-driven country.
Okay.
Left brain, analytical, hands-on type of stuff. They like to build stuff that they can actually see, feel, and touch.
Okay.
Which is why they did so great in the 60s, 70s, 80s, building cars and electronics and things like that. Which is also why they're not doing so great now in the digital world, because they don't quite understand software.
Can't touch a website.
Can't touch a website. And you can't really see it, you can't manifest it. It doesn't make any sense to them. So
Okay.
they work in that world. So one of the things that they love to see is headcount.
Right.
And I remember when Fuji took over, the big boss guy came in and gave this big motivational speech about he's going to grow the company. And one of the things he said was, "Yeah, I'm going to really grow revenues by increasing the headcount in this office."
What?
Yeah, and I remember thinking like, what? Isn't that the opposite of increasing revenue? Like hiring more people? Like,
Would
so
it make
anyways,
sense if he's like, we're going to increase revenue by firing half of you?
Yeah.
Everyone look under your seat. Here's an envelope.
If it's pink or blue, you let us know. So they started to like pump in more people and all this kind of stuff. And then one of the things they said was like, okay, everyone's got to work in the office. And so they kind of forced everyone to kind of come in the office. So my role in the company, and they kind of moved some people around, and the stuff I was doing before, they kind of pulled me away from that and put me in another project or whatever. This is actually quite common in Japan as well.
Oh, yeah.
Every April in Japan, basically the whole country like changes. And it's quite common in Japanese companies to move their staff around within the company.
Okay.
So you get hired at a university, you got a marketing degree, you go work for Mitsubishi. They're like, okay, Greg, we see that you got a marketing degree. You graduated from this university. Fantastic. We're going to put you in accounting.
Oh, cool. Okay. I guess the
"What?"
thinking is that eventually you get a really good understanding of how the business works from various different angles.
Possibly part of it is that. The other theory that I've also heard is that you don't gain enough of an understanding of any area to be any kind of threat to the company.
Ooh,
So you're kind of like mediocre all around instead of being outstanding in one area.
That's a dark side look at things.
Apparently it comes from the old kind of military mindset of them not worrying, just like, you might just rise up and stab your overlord in the head or something like that, So yeah, like every April you're like, Greg, you're in accounting. Okay, April 1st, now you're in sales. And,
Wow.
and this happened like many times with Gaijinpot. We would go meet with clients who are like, hey, we want to work with you guys to help promote our service. Okay, great. And April 1st would come around and a new team would show up. And I kid you not, many times the people we're meeting have absolutely no clue about digital marketing or anything like that. Like none at all.
And no clue what the previous team had been working on.
Yeah. And these are the people in charge of the digital marketing of this company.
That must be frustrating.
Did you hear that the Japanese guy who's in charge of the cybersecurity for the Tokyo Olympics, did you hear about him?
The guy that doesn't have an email address?
Doesn't
or
have a
something?
computer.
He doesn't have a computer?
He's never used He's never used a computer, and he's in charge of all the online security for the Olympics.
Well, it's his turn. He was rotated in.
And I'm like, either this guy is completely clueless or he's completely brilliant, because no one can hack this guy because he doesn't have a computer anyway. So maybe that's like his actual strategy is like, I am so secure, I don't even have a computer.
It's like that's what happened with the Battlestar Galactica, right? The only reason that it wasn't blown up by the Cylons is just because it was an old, out-of-date spaceship and no one could hack it.
Yeah. So
Nerd
anyways,
alert.
that's Japan. So anyways, so my work situation changed, and the company got a little bit less fun for me. So they put me in this new area. It wasn't what I was, doing before. They made me come in the office more. So I started to become, in Japan, they call office workers salarymen. You may have, you may have heard that term. It's called salarymen. So I became like basically a salaryman. So I got to go to work in the office in the morning. And I tell you, like, if you don't like commuting, good Lord, the Japanese commute is soul crushing. Imagine a train showing up and the doors open. There's like a wall of people there.
Right.
Like literally a wall of people there. No one gets off, and there's like 10 people all around you trying to get on.
God.
And that repeats itself every 3 minutes for like 2 or 3 hours.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I thought the BTS here was bad. And
So if you wait, like, oh, I'll catch the next one. You'll be there for like an hour, and every train
is the exact same.
exactly the same. So imagine doing that every day. And that's why those Japanese people, those salarymen looks like just dead on the train because their life is just basically going back and forth to work, and that's it.
Well, that must have been difficult because I've known you for a while. I don't know you really well, but you don't seem like the salaryman type.
No, I'm not.
I know.
And so what I liked about Gaijinpot was the owners gave me a lot of freedom to do what I wanted to do. And when Fuji took over, a lot of that freedom was removed.
Yeah.
And so at the same time, Jing left to Singapore, my job changed, and I'm like, this kind of sucks. And so I decided to okay, well, I'm going to focus less on work and kind of pick up a few hobbies and kind of things I used to enjoy. And one of which was cycling. I used to do mountain biking a long time ago when I was a kid, right? So I was like, well, I don't see any mountains around Tokyo, so let me buy a road bike and I'll try road biking. And I started to get into that, and it was kind of fun. But what I realized was that Tokyo is really a city designed for work. Like if you want to work in a big city, I think there's not a better city to do it in than Tokyo.
Really? Why?
Because of the logistics.
It's just easy to get around.
It's easy to get around. That whole entire city has been built to help the salaryman work. So getting around the city, like here, like when I came to your station, one gate is closed, and so everyone goes to the other gate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got the BTS, you got 3 or 4 cars. Japan got 15 cars, right? And the ticket machine in Japan, think about it, Shinjuku Station gets 3 million people a day through there. Imagine how many times that ticket machine processes those people's transaction. We got a little rabbit card here, so they have the same thing over there, right? So 3 million people a day times 10 ticket gates, just all clicking in and out. It never fails.
Shinjuku defeated me.
Yeah,
I'm not afraid to admit it. I pride myself on getting around big cities pretty well, but Shinjuku
Shinjuku
smashed me
got
down.
200 exits, I got lost in there a few times, but just the logistics of processing that many people, and it works all the time.
Yeah.
So because it has to, because if one machine broke or even half the machines broke, you have 10,000 people lined up just like that. If this train was delayed, just the backup is so fast.
Right.
It's like water flowing, you know what I mean? If you stop it, it backs up so fast that
you can't tell the water. Hey, back there,
you're screwed.
Stop.
So the logistics of getting around the city are just absolutely the best. Also, too, is that they are just even small things. They have restaurants on the train platform.
Oh. Really?
So, because it's when you're on the platform, you're waiting for the train anyways, right? And there's a possibility the train may take 5 or 6 minutes to come. So why not eat so you don't have to waste time eating at a restaurant or something as you're going to your client meeting or whatever, right? So you can just eat on the train station, right? So all these kind of things that just help people work. So, and even just the people themselves, going to work in the morning, the train sucks because it's jam-packed with people, but it's silent. It's totally silent. There's not people playing music. There's not people drunk, not people being an idiot, pushing or shoving or whatever. For the most part, I mean, it does happen every now and then. But
right.
I'd say that compared to most major cities, everyone is quite civil. So if you have to deal with all this kind of crap in the morning, we think about which would you rather deal with? A train where people are loud, being noisy, playing music, whatever, or one that's completely silent.
Yeah.
And people are just going about their day. So
Japanese are incredibly polite.
It's like that, right? So the city is great for work. But the problem is, for me, I found on the flip side, it's not great to do anything but work. Because to do anything but work actually requires work.
Okay.
So to go road biking, obviously Tokyo's a big city. There's not a lot of great biking areas around there where you can kind of get away from the city. So to do that, you have to take a train out of the city to go somewhere out in the mountains or something like that. To do that, you need to check the train schedule. You also can't take your bike on the train. You need to take it apart. You put it in this special train bag.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you can take it all apart, put it in this bag, get on the train, go an hour or two out of the city, ride, reverse that process to come back.
Okay.
So I found for me, the spontaneity of being able to enjoy these kind of hobbies is removed. It became almost work to not work and to have fun. You know what I mean?
Right. This is work to have a hobby.
Yeah. So, and then I did some freelance work for a few other websites, and I kind of quickly realized that I really struggle with working with the Japanese.
Really? But you were there for 7 years.
I was there for 7 years, but I was very lucky. I was very lucky in that the Japanese staff that I worked with were fairly cool. What I realized is like, it's hard for me to work in a Japanese company. It's almost impossible.
Okay.
I was lucky and I worked in a foreign company with Japanese staff. But when
exactly
I did
is my situation right now. I
yeah?
find it really hard to go back to a Thai company. I work for an American-owned company, and I love it. And I've worked for Thai companies, and it's a completely different mindset.
Yeah, same in Japan. Japan is very top-down oriented.
Yeah.
So you have the old geezer at the top who doesn't have a clue what's going on, telling people what to do. But worse than that, I found is like the Japanese, two things that really bothered me is one, their complete lack of flexibility at all. Like they're just so inflexible over there. Uh-huh. To the complete opposite of Thailand. Complete opposite of Thailand. Right?
Really?
Oh, Thailand is like, Maipenlai. Japan is like, this is the rule. Like, oh God, are you serious? And their complete lack of ability to think on their own. Because their culture is such that they're always trained and told what to do since like a very young age. They don't develop the mindset or the ability to make decisions on their own. So working with them, you have to be so clear in your instruction that it gets kind of frustrating because you can't really delegate and you might as well just do it yourself.
Is it worse than in Thailand? Because that's a complaint that some foreigners have here too, especially if they're educators. It's the rote learning and they're not taught to think outside the boxes. I mean, it's talked a lot about. I feel
like I've never worked in a Thai company and I haven't worked that much in Thailand, but I feel like Thais are a little bit more ingenious than the Japanese.
Okay.
Like the Japanese literally like are an empty book. Like if you crack their head open and you look inside, I was like, oh, there's an empty book in there. So I just write in what they want to do, close the head, hit start, and they go do it. I feel like the Thais have some degree of decision making. Now, whether they choose to follow your instruction or not is up to them, right? They might say like, screw that for long, I'm going to do it this way. But at least they'll make a decision.
Okay.
The Japanese literally like will stop moving if unless they know what to do. Okay. And so I found this to be, for example, a friend of mine, she has a tourism business in Japan, taking people on tours. So she tried to hire some Japanese sales staff to try to recruit new businesses. Okay. Right? Yeah. And she had a big problem with it because the Japanese sales staff would go to a client meeting, pitch them the service, and would come back and they report like, oh, the client said no. So then my friend is like, okay, well then what was your answer? Like what was a workaround that you tried to come up with? Did you try to pitch them something else? Did you try to find out why they're saying no? Like that's what a salesperson would do, right? Yeah. Wrong. Nope. In Japan, they're just like, do you want this? No. Okay, thank you. Bye. You come back to the office.
Really?
Yeah.
There's no plan B or no plan B. Answer C or
there's plan, but the thing is, there's plan B if you tell them what plan B is.
Okay.
So then they're like, so here's plan B. If they say no, you say why. And then they'll go do that. And then you got to teach them plan C, D, E, and all the way down the line. So he's like,
it sounds like when I used to work in a call center and calling people, and it was like, here's a binder. Yeah. It was like, if they say this, you answer this. Yeah. If you say this, you answer this.
So, and if they say something that you don't have that answer, then they get stuck.
Okay.
So I found that situation really frustrating. So I realized like I had a pretty lucky gig at Gaijin Pot. Working with Japanese companies is really hard for me. And then combine that with I'd been overseas for like 11 years at that point. And I looked at different countries I thought I would want to move to. And one of the things that I actually really was high on my list is I wanted to move back to an English-speaking country again.
Okay.
I looked in the States. I made this list of like cities that are roughly about 1 million population. And the States has got dozens of these, like dotted all over, like East Coast, West Coast, in the middle, And then I looked at Canada and like, So we have Vancouver,
like 6 cities with 1 million
Toronto,
people.
And like maybe Calgary, and like I was like, wow, that kind of sucks. So I looked at either Halifax or Vancouver or Victoria,
right?
Because I kind of like I wanted something to be on the ocean. I wanted something a bit smaller. So I went back to Victoria initially in April for a visit. And I remember at the time, Victoria in April is really nice. There's cherry blossoms everywhere. It's really nice. I was like walking around like, yeah, this is a really nice place. So,
I grew up there when I was a kid. I lived in Victoria for 5 years, and it's a beautiful town.
The city is so nice. Like it's so nice,
it's a beautiful town.
And I remember at the same time looking on the weather on the news, they're showing Halifax, and Halifax got like 5 feet of snow, and people were digging out. It's like, this is April, right?
You got to be hard to live on the East Coast, man.
Yeah.
There are hardy people out there.
Yeah, definitely. So that's when I thought, okay, I don't want to deal with that. I was like, okay, I'll settle into Victoria for now and see what it's like. So I ended up leaving Japan and moving back to Victoria, and that's where I've been for the past year and a half. And I just come back recently for a short business trip to Japan, and that's why I popped over to Thailand just for a little bit of R&R over here.
Right. So one thing we were talking about that I found really interesting was just before the show, we were chatting about how when you live in a city like Bangkok or Tokyo or any expat, as an expat existing outside of your home country, the daily challenge of doing anything simple, I think it sort of fuels us. It's what we learn to thrive on, the unpredictability of it. Like I was saying, and I've mentioned this on the show before, like for me, getting on a motorcycle taxi is still kind of cool. Even though I've been here 20 years, it's still kind of cool. Yeah. For my wife, it's just boring everyday stuff. And so you need to find a balance between me enjoying just everyday life and her being like, ugh, this again, But when you move, after experiencing this daily challenge and this daily like fuel, and you move back to your home country, and you were saying it's like you can quickly become bored to the point where you don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah.
So you've got to find a way to challenge yourself when you move back to your home country.
Yeah. I think when you first move back, obviously there's a bit of nostalgia.
Yeah.
And so that's really fun. I would say that lasted maybe a few months.
Okay.
I hadn't been in Victoria in almost 20 years. So it was kind of fun to see what's new and what's not new. And I hadn't lived in Canada in 11 years. So I was gone about 11 years. So the first few months, it was kind of fun to be able to catch up with some old friends, and then just kind of enjoy being able to talk to anybody on the street or go into a shop and just converse and
have water right from the tap.
Yeah, just kind of enjoy being in there. But I would say that for anyone who's thinking about moving back, if you're going back to your home country, finding some kind of hobby or something to do is really important. Because otherwise, I think you can get bored kind of quickly, and you start to question your decision to move back.
I see, because everything is easy.
Everything is easy, yeah, and there's no challenge anymore. And like you said, like when you live as an expat, just the abnormality of it becomes your norm.
Right.
So when all of that is removed, I hate to say this because it sounds a bit narcissistic, but when you're back home, you're kind of nothing special.
Well, of course, you're
just
not.
Like walking around, you're just like some random dude.
No one's calling you sexy, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm really not a handsome man.
Say it ain't so.
Were these Thai women lying to me? But not like that. But just like, I don't know. I think for me, like walking around, like living overseas, I just kind of like just the feeling and knowing of just being out of place, just being like a fish out of water. And that becomes, I think some people really struggle with that. They and they don't like it and they go back.
Yeah.
But other people, they kind of thrive on it. And for me, I think for me, it could, because I've always been kind of a fish out of water. Like as a kid, I grew up in multiple countries. At a young age, I started my business, my first business. And so I've always been like that. So living as an expat, just kind of a natural extension of that. It didn't feel tremendously odd to me. And then when I went back and just became like regular Canadian Anthony Joh,
Joe Smith instead of Somchai or whatever.
It was a little bit, I would say, I don't know what's the right word for it, but it was a bit, I would say, kind of a letdown, I would say it was.
I can see that because over here you're like, again, there's not a lot of ways of saying this without sounding like you got a big head, but when you move to a new country as an expat, you're immediately something unique. Yeah. And not necessarily good or bad. Maybe you're bad and unique, but at least you stand out. You're different. Out.
And also your situation is unique. What you experience is unique.
Yeah. And every day there's something like, oh, that's cool. I never experienced that back home. Yeah. And this is the thing that I've talked about this on the show before too. My wife and I have had discussions about moving back to Canada, and it's just, I'm really scared that I would just be bored. You know, after Bangkok, after 2 decades of just the controlled chaos that is Bangkok, moving back to a Canadian city is just...
You know, the other thing too is I tell you, like, I think also too, if you moved back, I find it like, so when I moved back to Canada, I knew before I moved there that I wanted to get into mountain biking again.
Yeah.
Right. So I already had kind of this hobby in mind that I'd done all this research. I watched all these YouTube videos and I was like, yeah, I can't wait to actually do this. So I feel like I was quite fortunate in that when I landed in Victoria, like literally within a couple months, I was doing that. And for the first like year I was there, I didn't do any work. I just rode my mountain bike everywhere, you know, and I created like an Instagram account. I created a YouTube channel just because that's my background in digital marketing. It's easy for me to do.
Yeah.
And also I actually really enjoyed doing that because I like kind of documenting my rides and seeing how I'm getting better.
Sure.
And working with some different partners and vendors and whatnot. So it wasn't really so much I was doing it as a business. It was just more of a hobby and it just kind of has grown from there. But I feel like having that kind of outlet really was great for me, being able to focus my energies on that, because I tell you, like, it was really hard for me to kind of meet up with some friends and people who lived in Victoria and even go on some dates with some women there and relate to people who've never left Victoria.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, talk a bit more about that, because I had the same thing when I went back for the first couple of times to Canada and trying to tell people this sort of life-changing experience that I've had, and they just, it's not their fault, but they just can't understand.
They can't understand it. And also too, is like the conversation to me is super weird. So you go on a date or you're talking to someone, they're like, hey man, what's it like to live in Thailand? You're telling them like all this like crazy stuff that's going on in your life, it happened in Thailand, right? And then you say like, so what have you been up to? And they're like, oh, I painted the deck last week, and you know, I dropped my kids off at school. And do you know the post office went on strike? And oh man, like my car had a flat. It's just like their day-to-day stuff. I found it hard to kind of relate to, because your experiences that you're relating seem just so much different.
Like, oh, there's a second coup.
Yeah.
And then I went to this 1,000-year-old temple in the jungle. And...
Like, remember when I was here, I filmed that riot that happened, I can't remember the name of that place, Victory Monument or something like that.
The Kokua intersection where you were dodging bullets and tear gas.
I was dodging bullets and tear gas, and people were getting shot and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
And then I go to Japan and I'm working with these like massive multinational Japanese companies building like campaigns. I lived in Europe and I traveled around Europe and like visiting all these car racetracks. And I go back to Victoria and like, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but when people ask me like, what have you been up to? I'm going to tell them. And I can't help but feel like I want them to tell me something equally interesting, because I want to be interested in what they're doing. I want to hear great stories from them. And I feel like you get that more from expats, because no one is here just kind of randomly by chance. You know what I mean? Like everyone, we're not all born here.
Right.
So people always have some kind of story about why they're here.
Yeah, right. And those range from pretty benign and average, like, oh, my company transferred me here and it's been fun, to like, I escaped a civil war and I'm wanted by the police, you know, or whatever, you know.
Even someone who's like for yourself, like you didn't come here originally to live here.
No.
But you came here and you made it work. So you have these interesting stories about, I decided to stay and I've done this and this and this and this and this to make it work.
Right.
Whereas like, so those are the stories I like to hear as I share my stories. But when I go back home, I remember like running into this guy who I went to high school with, and we're just like, he just happened to recognize me as I was coming out of a grocery store. We just chat a little bit, and I kind of like, he's telling me what he's doing and whatnot. And to me, he was almost kind of bragging. It sounded like he was kind of bragging a bit that he was working for like this local government office.
Okay.
Like he's working for BC Ferries. Like, I don't know if you know, like, yeah. So I live on an island, and to get anywhere, you have to take this ferry service. And let's face it, you can ask anybody on Vancouver Island about the ferry service, and they'll tell you it's garbage, right? Like this is, everyone hates the ferry service.
That sunshine breakfast on the ferry is pretty decent.
This is a company that has got a complete monopoly on getting on and off the island, because there's no bridge. Right. You have to take the ferry, and they've never been able to make a profit. Like, okay, so it's a government entity that they don't have a clue what they're doing. Anyways, so I remember saying, I work at the BC Ferries office just down the street over there. And I remember thinking like, wow, that's pretty great.
You know, it's funny, and you're right, and I agree with you, but it's hard not to sound like a dick when you're talking, when you say that.
I know. Yeah, totally.
You know, and those people, if they're happy, great. That's great. More power
Yeah.
to them, you know.
Yeah.
But it's hard to reconcile these experiences when you go back home and not sound like
you're bragging.
your life is small and my life has been so exciting. And even it doesn't necessarily be exciting. It just needs to be different.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Like I mean, my life is pretty similar to what my friends would be in Bangkok. I have an office job. I go to work in the morning. I sit in front of a computer for 8 hours and I go home. You know. But I can do. So, the potential for adventure and shenanigans here is just way more elevated than it is back home.
Yeah.
So it's hard not to sound like a bit of an ass, a pompous ass when you're like, oh, you work for the government office? Well, I was dodging bullets, you know, but it's kind of true, you know. It's
hard and what I found too also is like people over there back home, they're actually not really that interested in your story because I think they can't relate to it. Like everyone was like, oh man, you live in Bangkok, tell me what it was like. So you start to tell them, and you can see they kind of zone out after a while because they don't understand. You know, they don't really relate to the feeling of being here. What they're associating is maybe they came here on holiday one day, and they kind of think your life is like extended holiday or something like that.
Do you go to Khao San Road all the time? Yeah. How much Taiwanese do you speak?
Do you ride an elephant to work? All the time. Yes, it's just chained up outside. You know?
I remember but my first trip back, and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before. Apologies for repeating myself, but I was at some like souvenir store buying gifts for my friends back in Thailand, and the girl was like, "Oh, you're buying a lot of gifts?" And I said, "Yeah, I got to bring it back to my friends in Thailand." And I remember her exact response was, "Thailand? Wow, do they have like culture there?" And I'm like, what do you mean culture? Like, of course, you know. And it just showed just a complete lack of knowledge. It wasn't her fault, you know? But it's just easy to get in this bubble at home and become very comfortable and very sabai and just stay like that for forever. I guess it's possible. It's possible to do that anywhere.
Yeah, I think probably the Thais are the same thing. Like I think if a Thai person lives in Canada for 10 years or whatever, comes back here, they probably feel like the reverse, right?
Yeah,
like,
trying to explain a minus 40 degree Calgary winter to a Thai person is just not going to go over because they don't have any frame of reference, right?
So I think like for me, like I remember talking to a couple of expats before I moved back. I did some research online, found some YouTube channels, and I emailed a few people. I said, "Hey, what's it like?" And for the most part, I'd say a lot of them. It wasn't a tremendously positive experience to go back. Yeah. And I think, for me, I think that if I hadn't gotten into the sport of mountain biking and my social channels have done so well, because what mountain biking allowed me to do is talk to people about mountain biking. And if I didn't have that and I just like jump right back into like a daily 9 to 5 type of job, I think it would be really difficult.
Interesting. So you need to create.
You need to create some kind of buffer.
Barriers.
I think. Yeah, like create some. Give yourself some time, and I would encourage anybody to like try to find some kind of hobby or something to kind of put some stress or challenges in your life to create that kind of give you something excited to kind of get going with. The quote I got from YouTube is I found this guy's YouTube channel talking about like him moving back after extended period of time. And one of the things that he said in his video, which I really resonate to, he says like, I feel most at home when I'm away from home. And
that's deep.
I really resonate with this because honestly, being back in Canada now, it actually doesn't feel like I'm home. It does feel like I'm away from home. And home for me is being in a foreign country.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like I'm on extended holiday now.
So would you say that's reverse culture shock? Do you think that sums it up pretty well?
Yeah, it could be reverse culture shock or whatever you might call it. But like people asked me recently, like I just went back to Japan for a work contract, right? And I was gone for about a year and a half. And the people asking me, I saw some friends on there like, hey man, what does it feel like to be back? And to me, honestly, it didn't feel any different. It just feels like, I'm back in Japan. And even being back I haven't been in Thailand here in a while. I think maybe 2 or 3 years, 2 years, something like that. And it's just like, I'm just in Thailand. Like, it doesn't feel tremendously different to me. I think I'm just at the point where I'm like so used to being in foreign cities that I feel perfectly comfortable here. I feel perfectly comfortable and at home in Japan. And ironically, when I go back to Canada, it feels like I'm kind of like on a holiday. For me, like I'm trying to kind of work create a scenario where I can stay in Canada for certain time of the year, but then also maybe travel to Japan for work or travel to other countries for work or a scenario like that. And then I think long term, I probably won't stay in Canada. Eventually, my body's going to say, yeah, enough of this mountain biking crap. And, that's good. You know, I've already broken my finger and I've broken my rib in the last year.
Damn.
Like crashing into things. So eventually my body's going to be like, yeah, you know what? Let's take a bit of a break here. Golf maybe is an option that you want to look at, you know, lawn bowling or something like that. So when that point comes around, I think I'll look at another country again.
Interesting. Yeah. And one last thing before we go, you said it was interesting about how you can understand everyone in Canada now. Because we did a show about that, about how ignorance is bliss when you live overseas because you don't understand anyone. You can sit in a Starbucks, be surrounded by people talking, and it's almost like you're alone.
Yeah.
But it's annoying for you when you're understanding everyone.
Well, for me, the thing is this. For me, I am an introvert, right? So a lot of people misunderstand what introvert means. They think it means you're shy. But it's actually not. It's not, right? So if you follow that Myers-Briggs thingamajigger and you want to know what I am, I'm INTJ. Right?
Okay.
So I stands for introvert. And basically what an introvert is, there's introverts and extroverts. And it's kind of how you gain energy. An extrovert is someone who gets energy from being around lots of people. So they like going to a party.
Yeah.
And there's lots of people there and they thrive off that. An introvert goes to a party, they have a very short kind of social battery.
I see.
So
okay.
quickly, it goes down, and then they recharge when they're at home. Usually they charge when they're alone.
All right.
So for me, so you think like, why the hell do you live in a city like Tokyo or something? There's like millions of people around. The thing what I found for me is I can walk through Tokyo and be amongst millions of people, but because I don't understand what they're saying and I feel a bit detached from everybody, I actually feel like I'm kind of alone and in my head and just going about life like in a little bubble.
Interesting.
So my energy level stays quite high. Go to Canada, suddenly I can understand what everyone's saying around me. And this extra noise just drains my social battery really quickly.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So when I'm at the Starbucks and I'm sitting there in Japan, I mean, they can be talking about me. I don't know. I don't care. Unless,
right.
Whatever, right? In Thailand, they talk about me. The only time I kind of hear is like if I heard the word farang and I look around and I see someone look at me, I'm like, oh, they're talking about me. Okay, whatever.
He's either eating a guava or he's talking about me. I don't see any guava.
I don't see any guava, so they must be looking at me. No big deal. And one of the things that introverts, I think, hate, especially INTJ introverts, we hate is small talk, chit chat.
Oh, really?
Oh God, it just drives us nuts. I hate it. We like deep intellectual conversations.
Okay.
So we have like you know kind of two on-off switches. Like one, we either will say nothing, or we're talking about like world history. You know what I mean? It's we're like that, right?
Right.
So
none of this like cold today. How's the weather?
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things I liked about living as an expat, because when you meet another foreigner, you usually don't start off with like mundane chit chat like that, because they have a reason and a strange story about why they're there. Like, you're from Germany, or what?
Everyone's got a story.
Like, everyone's got a story, right? So you can kind of dive in and have something interesting conversation.
Right.
Back home, it's like, hey, how's it going? Oh yeah, I took the kids to school today, and you know, my mail didn't show up, and yeah, it's like, oh God. And so when you're sitting there, you're bombarded with this all the time. I just literally want to get up and say, like, I don't want to hear about your conversation. I don't care about your kid. And in Victoria, I noticed in Victoria, it centers around the government, transportation, and kids. Oh, I dropped my kids off school today, and the bus was late, and this kind of stuff. I'm just like, good Lord, do I not want this information in my head?
Well, man, lots of good insights there. Lots to think about if someone is thinking about moving back home, especially after being over here for a long time. And I think the longer this is not breaking news, but the longer you're here, the harder it is to go back, I think. And
yeah,
it's something that I've been here so long now personally that the thought of moving back, it kind of frightens me a little bit. Yeah. I don't know if I'd be able to handle it. I've done the fish out of water thing when I first got here.
Yeah.
It's not easy. And I don't know if I'd like to be in that position again. I'm too old. I want to be surrounded by things I know how to work, even if it's in Bangkok where things are still kind of a challenge. I know how to handle that challenge. And I don't know, maybe those are two conflicting thoughts, but moving back to Canada it would be a big thing.
I think for anyone listening to this, if they're thinking about going back, the number one thing they should keep in mind is if you go back, try to go back to something different. Like that guy that I talked to, this one guy who I talked to who has a YouTube channel. He moved back to Edmonton, and he was from Japan. He was living in Japan for like 10 years. He moved back to Edmonton. He was originally from Edmonton.
Okay.
And he said like it's just a nightmare for him to go back. It was so boring, and everything we talked about, just not being able to connect with anybody there and all that kind of stuff. And he said to me, like, yeah, if I was going to go back again, I probably wouldn't go back to Edmonton. He would go somewhere different,
right?
Even within Canada. So I think for everyone thinking about going back, I think the natural tendency is to go back to your home country because you kind of miss it, right? Like your home city, right? You kind of miss it. You have this kind of nostalgic view of it. Like, yeah, it'd be kind of fun to go back to where I grew up or where I used to work or where I was before I left. But I think that you might be let down a bit by that experience. And then like this guy, like these guys mentioned, he was quite depressed because he's like literally, I mean, let's face it, living in Edmonton is not the best place to live in.
No,
right?
it's a pretty dreary,
it's a
cold
pretty
town.
dreary place. But I think like if you're going to go back, try to go somewhere different. Even if you're going to your home country, try to go to a different city, which is one. And then two, try to pick up some kind of new hobby or some kind of new activity or something that you didn't do before that you can kind of dive into. And I really recommend like diving into that more so than diving into work if you can. If you go back and you jump into like a 9 to 5 again and you're kind of right back into that routine, I think that's going to be really challenging.
Yeah, that's
so
not
give
really...
yourself some like time if you can afford it. Financially, if you can afford it, give yourself some time. You're in a new city, even if you're in your home country and discover a city, take up a sport, take up something that's kind of new, and that will, I think, help you transition back into your home country a lot easier.
Interesting. All right, man, lots to think about. If I ever do go back to Canada, I'm going to send you an email again. Hey, man, what do I do? Well, thanks, man. It's good to talk to you. And everyone follow Tony online. You're going to keep posting on your mountain biking Instagram and social media stuff?
Yeah, if they want to follow me on Instagram, is probably the best. Just Anthony Joh. And then my Canadian, if you want to follow my mountain biking, it's Canadian Mountain Biker, CDN MTB.
Okay, cool. Well, hopefully you don't break any more bones.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, good to chat with you.
Dude, that was a great interview. I actually feel like I owe Tony a mini apology because I saw him at the meetup and I meant to have a sit down with him since he is, as you said, he's the co-founder, and I've listened to a bunch of those shows from season 1. But I met him back in the day. I was at the launch party for the Bangkok Podcast.
That's
I was
right.
there, and so I've met him before. I've met him before, but I haven't actually. I had like a lengthy conversation with him since I became your co-host, and so that was on my agenda. He was supposed to be one of my dance partners at the meetup, and then
what these things are like. You always want to sit down with someone, but then everyone's so busy running around, and it's hard to talk.
It was just kind of chaotic, and there were just other whatever, and then I missed him, so I feel bad. Very cool guy, and next time he's here, I will. Have a sit down with him and hear more about his side of the creation of the Bangkok Podcast.
Yeah, a very interesting guy, and it's funny because he's not one of these guys that bothers about putting a filter on himself, and he just sort of says it like he sees it, and it's kind of refreshing sometimes. And he's got some very interesting stories and really good insights into traveling and living overseas and living back in your home country and stuff. So like he was saying, he might be back here in the not too distant future, and then we can all go out for beer. So
I think this reminds me of an interesting topic. I think just the specific topic of Thailand versus Japan is an interesting one. I've got a buddy who just moved from Thailand to Japan, and so maybe we'll do a show on that in the future.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting too. And you know what I'm also going to do just for our patrons? When we put out this show to our patrons, I'm going to include a photo that we took from the Bangkok Podcast launch party in 2010 with you, me, and Tony standing together.
I was actually
no idea of what the future would hold.
That's crazy. Like, because I have zero memory of that. I have zero memory.
There's a lot of booze flying around, but yeah.
I basically didn't know.
I'll put it in there.
When you launched the Bangkok Podcast, I really didn't know what a podcast was. I remember I remember someone was like, "Hey, Greg's doing this thing. Like, there's a party." I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay, whatever." And I just showed up. I don't think I knew what you were doing. I was just like, "Yeah, I'll be there.
That's funny, man. It's funny looking back. Hey,
Yeah, for
good
sure.
times. All right. Well, thanks, Tony. It was really cool seeing you, and I hope to see you again soon. Okay, let's get into another round of Token Thai, where our good friend Bowling works with us to get to the bottom of certain quirky elements of Farang and Thai culture that confuse, befuddle, or vex those trying to expand their cultural horizons. So here we are with Bowling. Okay, Bowling, so this week we're going to turn the tables a bit, and we're going to ask you a question about Thai culture. And this might seem a little bit hard to answer, but I think if we batted back and forth a little bit, we might be able to drill down a bit further. But why do Thais seem to constantly be eating from the breakfast, and then it's like little Pac-Man dots, like mini snacks, teet, 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 until the next big meal, and then it's teet, 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 until the next big meal. Can you think of any like cultural reason why that would be like that?
Ooh, that's a difficult one because like, when you grow up with something, you don't think much about it. You just like, you've seen it and then it's like you have breakfast and then when you got to work, then someone bought something on the way to work, like, like a little lukchin ping or, like some snack and they put it there. And when you walk past it, you put it in the mouth, don't even think about it. It's like kind of mindless eating. It's there. I gotta eat. And then you go for lunch and then repeat. As same as morning, you buy something in and then, or you got a gift from like my office, like people traveling abroad quite a lot. So when they come back, they just like, it's kind of gesture of caring that you have to have something for the others who didn't travel. Easiest is like chocolate from duty free.
Sure.
Yeah. So, or like snack from that town. And also the fact that food is so easy to find in Thailand. You walk out, you see street food, smells so good. Oh, let's do it. Or you just want to get into 7-Eleven, grab a bottle of water, and then you're just like, oh, even the cashier asks, like, would you like some more dim sum?
Like an upsell.
Right? Yeah.
It might be because an element of like maybe economics involved here too, because a lot of Thais are super entrepreneurial. So that's why they have street carts and street food and stuff. I mean, maybe this spills over into has legal repercussions too, because you can't really have street food in Western countries. It's restricted. So we just, like you said, food here is everywhere. But in Canada, for instance, it's not. Once you walk outside, it's just outside. There's no options unless you go into another restaurant.
Like you said, like entrepreneur side, because I think like the mindset that everyone has to eat. It's gonna be like you can sell that because people have to eat.
Yeah, I wonder if I'm just guessing. I do think Thai people eat less per meal, so it's like the portion sizes are smaller. So for us, where our meals tend to be really big, an hour after my meals, I'm not hungry. But a Thai person who might be eating a smaller portion, they're not pigging out like in the formal meal, then it's easier for you guys to snack. Is that possible?
That's a there's a possibilities there, and I think one thing that come up in my mind is, maybe because we also like variety. You see the way Asian or Thai people eat and the way the Western eat. When you guys go for dinner, you order your own dish.
Right.
One per person, right?
Right.
Why? We order like, if we go 4, we order 5 dishes and we all share.
Right.
I think we like the variety of the food. Like we have a small bowl of noodles at lunch and then we walk past mu ping, we walk past, deep fry something and then, it's just like, I want to try that. I want to have that too. And then when you buy a lot, you just put it there and then you spread out and your friends, your colleague eat it with you.
Yeah, I think for Westerners, when we eat a meal, we're like storing energy until the next meal. Like we eat enough to get us to the finish line for the next meal. So I've been out with a lot of Thais and they eat like a couple of mouthfuls because they know they're going to be snacking. Whereas I'm like, no, you've got to like, as Louis C.K. says, you've got to eat until you hate yourself and then you can make it to the next meal. So maybe an apt metaphor is like foreigners eat for the sprint, but Thais eat for the marathon. I don't know, maybe. Does that make sense?
Also caring, because like, I bought this for you. So you have to eat it, right? When someone said like they specifically buy this for you. So
Yeah, all right. Food for thought. Haha. All right. Thanks, Bowling.
Thank you.
I got to say, we need more Bowling. She's just a super interesting person. I think her insights are great. We got to get her on the show more.
Yeah, well, we got some back episodes of Token Tai all set to go, and we're going to sit down with her again soon to record some more. Just got to come up with some topics.
Cool.
That's the easy part.
Cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we'd like to say thank you to Alvaro Brandon for lending us his support at the show shout-out level. And Greg, what did you find out about Alvaro?
Well, and as it turns out, Alvaro was another one of these patrons of ours who didn't respond to the 3 emails I sent out to him asking him how he was doing and some information on him. So I'm left to just do my own research online about Alvaro and see what I can find out. So as you know, I always head to the internet anagram server because I have a strange fascination with anagrams and people's names. And Alvaro's got a really interesting one, and 2 that jumped out to me that maybe give some insight into his personality, or maybe not. The first one is Baron or Vandal.
Interesting. I like that.
Minor royalty or a thug. You know what I mean?
I like that. Baron or Vandal. That's like a name of a movie or maybe a punk rock band.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Baron or Vandal. That'd be cool. And the second one that I thought jumped out at me right away was Brr, do anal nova.
Dude,
I don't know.
I'm not sure you really should have let people know that popped into your head.
And so I didn't get a lot out of that. So what I did was I searched around online, and his name is not too common online, but I did find a documentary movie that was made in 2015, and maybe this is our buddy Alvaro. The documentary is simply called Alvaro, and it is described as a meditation on memory and perseverance. Alvaro follows 75-year-old South Williamsburg resident Alvaro Brandon on his daily route to feed 40 stray cats in his neighborhood.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Do you think an 80-year-old stray cat feeding guy that would support a podcast in Thailand? I don't know.
Sure, why not? That'd be great. Let's just go with that because I think that's just a great story.
Well,
let's just go with that.
Well, Alvaro, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy stray cat feeding schedule, man. We do appreciate your support, and you are going to be getting a postcard from us on your birthday. So please check your mailbox, check your junk email. Maybe something got snagged up there in the filters, but we would love to hear back from you. So again, thanks, man.
All right. Thank you, Alvaro. And a final thanks to all of our patrons who help keep the show ad-free. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they are helping support the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Yeah, that's right. And you can also listen to each episode on YouTube, chat with us online, or even reach out to me directly on Twitter where I'm BKK Greg. So thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you back here next week.
Absolutely. U.S. tariffs on Thailand and how the U.S. tariffs on Thailand and how